Clara Boone found her whole life stacked beside the Juniper Draw gate before sunrise. Her trunk sat in the dirt. Her rolled blanket leaned against it. Someone had folded her brown work coat across the top, as neatly as if she were leaving by choice. Mason Pike stood on the other side of the gate. "You're done here, Clara." She looked at him, then at the bunkhouse behind him. Cold September air moved through the dry grass. Somewhere near the loading shed, a loose chain knocked against a timber post. Clara set her pencil behind one ear. "For hiring one man? For ignoring my order?" He worked. "That wasn't your decision to make." She glanced toward the ranch yard. Men were already moving between the pens. A cook carried a sack of flour toward the kitchen. 2 horses stood tied beside the office. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday. Only Clara had been removed. Mason rested 2 fingers against his belt buckle. "The Pritchards froze hiring until the sale is finished. You knew that. I put 1 man on 1 day's labor. You crossed me in front of the crew." He cleared the loading lane before dark. Mason's mouth tightened. "That isn't the point." Clara turned her pencil between 2 fingers. It helped when someone wanted an answer faster than she wished to give one. The lane had to be cleared. Mason stepped closer to the gate. "I can still fix this." Clara stopped turning the pencil. "You can apologize. Tell the men you acted without authority. Tell them I decide who works here until the ranch changes hands. And then, you keep your room. You keep your wages. You keep your place on the shipping crew." Clara looked past him toward the bunkhouse door. For 6 years, she had counted meal stores there, assigned day labor, kept track of broken tools, marked feed deliveries, and known which men could be trusted with which jobs. She had earned every inch of that place. She bent and lifted her trunk handle. "No." Mason stared at her. "No? I'll leave." His expression shifted. He had expected anger, maybe begging. Clara gave him neither. She dragged the trunk through the dust until one wheel struck a stone. Mason opened the gate. "You're throwing away steady work for a cowboy whose name you didn't even know yesterday." Clara stopped beside him. "He didn't ask me to. That makes it smarter?" "No." She pulled the trunk through. "It just makes it mine." Yesterday, the stranger had arrived around noon. He came walking beside a freight wagon that had lost a rear wheel 2 miles east of Juniper Draw. His boots were gray with road dust. His dark shirt had dried sweat across the shoulders. He carried no bedroll and no saddle. Mason had seen him from the office porch. No work. The stranger had looked toward the loading shed, where 3 ranch hands were struggling to move broken crates from the main lane. "I can work. No hiring." "I didn't ask for permanent work." Mason had walked away. Clara had been checking the meal count near the kitchen door. She watched the stranger stand there for several seconds. He did not complain. He walked toward the water barrel, drank 1 cup, then set it back where he found it. Clara called after him. "You know how to move freight?" He looked over. "I know how to move what's in the way." That answer nearly made her smile. Nearly. She took a small brass token from the wooden box beside the kitchen ledger. JDR 41. "One day," she said. His eyes dropped to the token. "What's that?" "Gets you supper." "I haven't worked yet." "You will." He took it. "What do I call you?" "Elias." "Clara." She pointed toward the loading lane. "Start with those crates." He rolled his sleeves without another question. 3 hours later, Clara learned 2 things about Elias. He worked harder than most men who arrived asking for wages, and he disliked being told he was wrong. They were moving a broken timber brace when Clara stopped him. "Not that direction." Elias shifted his grip. "It clears the wagon if we turn it north, and blocks the feed door. We move it again later." "That wastes time." He studied the doorway. Then he studied Clara. "You've thought through everything in this yard?" "No." "Sounds like yes." She pointed west. "Turn it." He did. When the brace settled into place, the lane remained open, and so did the feed door. Elias brushed sawdust from his palm. "Your way was better." Clara raised an eyebrow. That hurt? A little. By supper, Mason had learned what she had done. He took one look at Elias sitting with the crew and saw the brass token beside his plate. Who gave you that? Elias nodded toward Clara. Mason's eyes moved across the room. Clara was carrying a sack of beans into the pantry. Boone. She stopped. No hiring means no hiring. He worked 6 hours. I gave an order. I had a blocked lane. You had a choice. Clara set down the sack. So did you. No one spoke after that. Now, standing outside the ranch gate the next morning, Clara wondered whether those 4 words had cost her 6 years. A horse approached from the east. She turned. Elias rode into view on a borrowed bay mare, still wearing yesterday's dusty shirt. He slowed when he saw Clara's trunk. What happened? Mason happened. Elias dismounted. He fired you? He thinks I fired myself. For hiring me? For deciding something without permission. Elias looked toward the gate. I can speak to him. No. Clara gripped the trunk handle. You worked. I paid you. That business is finished. It doesn't look finished. It is to me. He looked at her belongings. Where will you go? Silver Mesa. That's 12 miles. I know. He took a step toward her trunk. Clara moved between them. Don't. I was going to carry it. I know. Something in his face softened. All right. Hoofbeats sounded from inside the ranch. 2 well-dressed men rode from the main house with a ranch hand behind them, carrying an iron ring of keys. Mason followed on foot. Clara recognized the riders. Walter and Thomas Pritchard, the brothers who owned Juniper Draw. Walter pulled up near the gate. Then he looked at Elias. His entire manner changed. Mr. Mercer. Clara went still. Thomas Pritchard dismounted. We didn't expect you this early. Elias glanced at Clara once before answering. I was already nearby. Walter gave a nervous laugh. Yes. Well, everything is ready. The ranch hand stepped forward with the keys. Thomas held them out. Juniper Draw is yours, Mr. Mercer. Clara looked at the dusty cowboy she had paid 1 day's wages. Elias Mercer. The cattle shipper whose name appeared on freight notices from Denver to Santa Fe. The millionaire Mason had spent the last month preparing to impress. Elias took the iron key ring. Mason's face had gone rigid. Clara looked from the keys to Elias. Yesterday he had eaten supper with JDR 41 beside his plate. Today he owned the ranch. Elias walked toward her. Clara. She lifted her chin. You bought Juniper Draw? This morning. And yesterday? I came early. To inspect us. To see how the place worked before everyone knew who I was. Clara looked at the gate. Then at Mason. Then back at Elias. He held out the keys, not toward her, but at his side. Come back inside. Clara did not move. The railroad whistle sounded faintly from Silver Mesa. She looked at the millionaire in the dusty shirt. What kind of owner are you planning to be? Clara kept her eyes on Elias. The iron keys hung from his hand. Walter Pritchard shifted in the saddle behind him. Mason stood by the gate, watching the new owner and the woman he had dismissed less than an hour earlier. Elias answered quietly. One who knows when he doesn't know enough. Clara glanced at the keys. That sounds good in a sentence. I'll have to prove the rest. Mason stepped forward. Mr. Mercer. She was dismissed under proper ranch authority. Elias turned. Did she steal? No. Damage anything? No. Refuse assigned work? Mason's jaw tightened. She refused my authority. Elias looked toward the cleared loading lane. I'll speak with Miss Boone privately. Mason touched 2 fingers to his belt buckle, then stepped aside. Clara dragged her trunk toward the freight shed. I'm still leaving. Elias followed but kept several feet between them. You asked what kind of owner I intend to be. I need someone to show me how this place actually runs. You have Mason. I have Mason's version. Clara stopped. That isn't the same thing. No. A freight whistle sounded faintly from Silver Mesa. Elias set the keys on an overturned crate. My first shipment leaves in 2 days. 112 head. They load tomorrow night. Clara stared at him. You bought this ranch without knowing the west loading chute is braced with green timber? I knew the books. The books don't move cattle. I'm beginning to understand that. She pointed toward the yard. The south pen gate sticks when it gets cold. The night crew is short 2 men. The feed wagon has a cracked hub. Silver Mesa wants cattle grouped in 16, or they jam the narrow ramp. Elias listened. Does any of that appear in your books? She asked. No. Then you bought numbers. I bought a ranch. I just haven't learned it yet. That answer slowed her. 48 hours, Elias said. Work with me until the shipment is gone. Clara gave a short laugh. You want to rehire me before my trunk is cold. Not rehire. You name your wage. Independent work. Clara took the pencil from behind her ear and turned it once. $3 a day. Meals included. I control loading assignments, freight lanes, feed rotation, and night shifts. Mason runs the rest? Yes. Done. She stopped turning the pencil. You didn't bargain. You gave me a price. That usually makes rich men bargain harder. I've met poor men who do the same. The corner of her mouth moved. 48 hours. They shook hands once. They shook hands once. By noon, Juniper Draw had changed rhythm. Clara stood beside the loading shed with a slate, while men tested gates, repaired rails, and shifted timber. Elias had removed his coat and rolled his sleeves. He worked beside 3 hands, replacing the warped chute brace. Mason watched from the shade. You don't need to carry lumber, Mr. Mercer. Today, the lumber needs moving. Clara kept writing, but she watched Elias. He asked questions before changing anything. When Frank Dyer told him the north pasture pump failed every few weeks, Elias walked out to see it himself. That did not make Clara trust him. It kept her watching. Near dusk, Elias entered the freight office carrying a sheet of figures. Mason's labor plan. Clara looked up. What plan? After this shipment, he recommends cutting 6 permanent positions and using seasonal hands. Which 6? Elias read the names. By the 4th, Clara was shaking her head. You can't. The savings are significant. On paper, that matters. So does the ranch. Elias leaned against the desk. Show me. Clara pulled a blank sheet closer. Frank is listed as a fence hand. He repairs pumps. Samuel Price is listed for night stock. He knows every Silver Mesa loading rule. Tom Bell drives wagons, but he also shoes workhorses when the farrier can't come. She went through all 6. Elias studied the page. You're saying the payroll descriptions are incomplete. I'm saying you'll save wages and pay twice as much every time something breaks. I can hire skilled men when needed. Then wait for them to arrive while cattle stand behind a broken gate. Outside, a hammer struck timber. Elias folded the labor plan. I was going to approve this. Clara's eyes lifted. Then don't offer me a permanent job. I haven't. You were going to. How do you know? You keep asking how I run things. He almost smiled. Clara did not. I won't help you replace men whose work you haven't bothered to understand. Elias opened the door. Come with me. They spent the next 2 hours walking Juniper Draw. Frank showed Elias the pump shed. Samuel explained why Silver Mesa rejected badly grouped cattle. Tom Bell opened his tool chest and showed the shoeing tools he had bought with his own wages. After dark, Elias returned to the office. Mason was waiting. The cuts are canceled, Elias said. Mason stared at him. All 6? All 6. Mason looked at Clara. She convinced you. The ranch did. That woman has been back half a day. She showed me what I missed. Mason tapped his belt twice. Clara heard it. Later, she sat at the bunkhouse table checking the loading list. A brass object slid across the wood. JDR 41. She looked up. Elias stood opposite her. You kept it. You said it bought supper. It did. I earned the meal. I don't need the token. Clara closed her fingers around the brass. You always return what you borrow? When I remember. That sounds less impressive. It's more accurate. She tucked the token into her pocket. Elias nodded toward her papers. You still think I'm only a man who bought numbers? Ask me after the train leaves. He accepted that. A door opened behind him. Mason stood in the hallway, his face controlled. Mr. Mercer. Elias turned. I've spoken to the men, Mason said. Clara set down her pencil. Mason looked at Elias, not her. If she is still giving orders at sunrise, most of your permanent crew will not report for the shipment. No one spoke for several seconds. Mason stood in the bunkhouse doorway with his hat in one hand. Elias looked at him. How many men? Enough. That isn't a number. 11 have already agreed. More will decide by morning. Clara pushed back her chair. The loading list lay open beneath her hand. You told them I was replacing you. Mason looked at her. I told them what I see. And what is that? A new owner arrives. You get his ear. 6 jobs nearly disappear. Then you convince him to reverse the cuts. I convinced him to look. You think the difference matters to men who have watched owners come and go? Elias stepped between them. Mason, if the crew has concerns, bring them to me. I just did. No, you brought me an ultimatum. Mason put on his hat. Sunrise. He left. The bunkhouse door closed behind him. Clara stared at the empty doorway. Elias picked up the labor list. I can get men from Silver Mesa. She looked at him quickly. How many? 20 by afternoon if I pay enough. And tomorrow, Mason tells every man here he was right. I have a shipment to make. So do they. Elias lowered the paper. Clara stood. If you replace them the first time they push back, they'll never believe anything you say about steady work. What do you suggest? I find out what Mason told them. You think they'll speak to you? No. She took her coat from the chair. But some may speak if I stop trying to convince them. Morning came pale and cold. Nearly half the bunks were empty before breakfast. Work gloves hung unused from pegs. Tin cups remained upside down beside untouched plates. Clara counted 9 men present. Normally, 21 worked a shipping day. Elias entered carrying his coat. Silver Mesa replacements are available. Clara looked at him. Did you call them? No. That mattered. She folded the loading sheet. Give me until noon. To do what? Listen. Frank Dyer was the first man she found. He sat outside his small rented room near the North Pasture Road, repairing a leather strap. He did not invite Clara inside. You here for Mercer? No. For yourself? No. Frank kept working. Clara waited. Finally, he said, Mason says Mercer kept us because you embarrassed him into it. Did Mason tell you Mercer canceled the cuts after walking the ranch? He said rich men like being admired for changing their minds. Clara leaned against the fence. What do you think? Frank looked at her then. I think every owner says permanent until winter gets expensive. That answer stayed with her. Samuel Price said something similar. So did Tom Bell. Different words. Same problem. They were not walking out because they hated Clara. They were walking out because none of them trusted what came after the shipment. By noon, Clara returned to the ranch office. Elias had covered the desk with payroll sheets. Well, they don't trust you. I gathered that. They don't trust me either. That made him look up. Clara took off her gloves. They think Mason speaks for them because someone has to. What do they want? Clear terms. They have wages. They have habits, not terms. She pulled a blank page toward herself. Who controls assignments? What happens if someone refuses dangerous work? What is the shipping bonus? Can permanent men be cut without notice? Who decides overtime? Elias sat across from her. You want employment rules. I want fewer promises. For the next 3 hours, they wrote. Not speeches. Numbers. Base wages. Night loading rates. Shipment bonuses. Authority by job. Notice before permanent positions could be removed. A way for workers to bring a complaint without going through Mason. Elias crossed out one line. That costs too much. Clara turned the pencil between her fingers, then cut it. He looked at her. You agree? If you think it is wrong, cut it. You argued for it 10 minutes ago. I argued because I thought it was fair. You asked me to help write terms, not win every argument. Elias studied her for a moment. Then he restored the line. Why? Because you were right the first time. By late afternoon, the deadline felt closer. A wagon arrived from Silver Mesa with word from the railroad agent. The contracted train would be ready at 9 the next morning. No delay. No second loading window. Clara read the message twice. We have less than 18 hours. Elias nodded. I can still bring replacements tonight. She looked toward the bunkhouse. No. You're certain? No. That answer surprised him. Clara folded the message. But I know what happens if you do. They rode toward Silver Mesa before sunset. On the road, Elias kept his horse beside hers. After several quiet miles, he said, When I offered you work yesterday, you thought I was buying gratitude. I thought it was possible. And now? Clara watched the road ahead. Now I think you are trying not to. He gave a small nod. That is not the same as trust. No. I know. The direct answer made her glance at him. Elias continued. I don't want you agreeing with me because I own the ranch. I don't. I noticed. That pulled a brief smile from her. Then it was gone. At the edge of Silver Mesa, Clara slowed her horse. If this fails, the contract is yours to lose. Yes. And you still won't bring replacement men. Not unless the crew chooses not to work after seeing the terms. Clara looked at him. Money was on the line. Reputation too. He could have solved the immediate problem with cash before sunset. Instead, he was riding beside her toward men who might refuse him. Something in her view of Elias shifted. Not enough for comfort. Enough to matter. Night had settled by the time they reached the railroad siding. Steam drifted from a waiting engine farther down the track. Only 5 Juniper Draw hands stood near the loading pens. Frank was among them. Samuel, too. Clara dismounted. Where are the others? Frank looked down the road. Coming. Hoofbeats carried through the darkness. A line of riders appeared beyond the freight sheds. Mason rode at the front. Behind him came the rest of the Juniper Draw crew. Clara looked at the station clock. Less than 12 hours remained before the contracted train was due. Mason stopped beneath the siding lamp. He looked at Elias, then at Clara. We'll hear your terms. The clock above them kept moving. Mason dismounted beneath the siding lamp. The Juniper Draw crew spread behind him in a loose line. Some men kept their hats low. Others looked toward the loading pens where the first cattle waited behind timber rails. Elias stepped forward. You said you'd hear the terms. Mason nodded. First, we settle one thing. Clara already knew what was coming. Mason pointed toward her. She goes. Several men shifted their weight. Elias did not move. Mason continued. Put her back on supplies if you want. Keep her wages, but she does not give orders to this crew. Clara looked toward the station clock. 8 hours and 40 minutes remained. Behind the siding, an engine released a burst of steam. Elias spoke. And if I refuse? The men who came with me leave. Frank Dyer looked down. Samuel Price rubbed both hands over his coat sleeves. Clara could see it clearly now. This was no longer about a loading assignment. It was about who would own the next decision. She stepped forward. I'll go. Elias turned. No. Mason gets his crew. You get the shipment. That is not the agreement. It is a way out. For whom? Clara's pencil was in her coat pocket. Her fingers touched it but did not pull it free. For the ranch. Mason crossed his arms. There. She understands. Clara looked at him. No. I understand what the train costs if we miss it. She turned back to Elias. I can finish tonight as a clerk. Tomorrow I'm gone. Elias studied her face. Then he looked at the men. No. Mason gave a short, humorless laugh. You're willing to lose a contract over one woman? I'm unwilling to solve every disagreement by throwing out whoever has less power. Mason's eyes narrowed. Elias reached inside his coat and pulled out several folded pages. These are the work terms. He handed the first sheet to Frank. Base wages stay. Another sheet went to Samuel. Night loading pays extra. A third to Tom Bell. Shipment bonuses are written down. So are duties. Notice before permanent positions are removed. And a way to bring complaints without asking any one man's permission. Mason stared at the papers. You expect them to trust ink? No. Elias looked along the line. I expect them to read it, ask questions, and decide. Mason stepped closer. They already decided. Then let them say so. The siding grew quiet except for cattle shifting behind the rails. Elias faced the crew. No man here will be fired tonight for walking away. No man will lose wages already earned. If you accept these terms, take your position. If you don't, leave. Clara watched Mason. For the first time, he had nothing to say for anyone except himself. Frank read the page again. Then he folded it once. I'll load. Mason turned sharply. Frank. Frank looked at him. I heard him. Samuel stepped beside Frank. So did I. Tom Bell followed. 2 more men crossed the siding. Then another. Mason's line grew thinner. He looked at Elias. You think this makes you a good owner? I think it gives them their own answer. Mason's eyes moved to Clara. You planned this. No. She glanced toward the clock. I planned to load cattle. That finally ended it. 3 more men walked toward the pens. Mason remained with 4 others. Elias held out one last sheet. The same terms apply to you. Mason looked at the paper, then at the crew already moving into position. He did not take it. I don't work under her. Clara said nothing. Mason placed his hat firmly on his head. Then I'm done. He turned toward his horse. 2 of the remaining men hesitated. 1 followed him. The other 3 crossed toward Clara. Mason mounted without looking back. His hoofbeats faded down the road. Clara checked the clock. Positions. The siding came alive. Samuel opened the first gate. Frank moved toward the loading ramp. Tom Bell checked a wagon wheel before signaling the next group forward. Elias took off his coat and rolled his sleeves. Clara pointed toward the east rail. Mercer. He looked over. That brace needs another man. He joined Frank without argument. The next hours narrowed into work. Counts. Gates. Boots striking timber. Steam drifting over the pens. At 4 in the morning, a hinge failed on the second holding gate. Tom Bell had it repaired before Clara finished reorganizing the next group. At 6, one section backed up near the narrow ramp. Samuel changed the order without being told. At 7:20, the last group entered the loading lane. Clara stood beside the chalkboard, marking each number. Elias came to her with dust across his shirt. How close? Too close. Useful answer. You prefer lies? Not anymore. The final gate shut. Samuel raised one arm. Loaded. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the locomotive whistle cut across the siding. Clara looked at the clock. 8:43. 17 minutes remained. Rail workers secured the final cars. The engine pulled slowly forward. Iron wheels began their steady clatter. Men stood along the siding, watching Juniper Draw's first shipment under new ownership move toward the open track. Elias came to stand beside Clara. We made it. She looked at him. They made it. So did you. Clara pulled the JDR 41 token from her pocket. Still think this ranch needs a woman who gets fired for hiring strangers? I think it needs an operations superintendent who charges $3 a day when she should ask for more. Clara almost laughed. Not tonight. No. He nodded toward the departing train. Tomorrow. 3 weeks later, Juniper Draw sounded different. Not quieter. Clearer. The new work terms were posted beside the bunkhouse kitchen. Assignments went up each morning, where anyone could read them. Clara had accepted the superintendent position after changing 3 lines in Elias's contract and raising her own wage. He signed without complaint. On a bright October afternoon, Elias carried one end of a long pine board across the yard. Clara carried the other. "Higher," she said. "It is level." "It is not." He looked at the wall. "You say that with great confidence." "I have eyes." They mounted the board beside the kitchen door. Across the top, Clara had painted spaces for open jobs, daily assignments, and wages. She reached into her pocket. JDR 41 rested in her palm. Elias watched as she hung the brass token from a small nail at the corner. "You keeping that?" "Yes." "For sentimental reasons?" "No." He waited. Clara handed him the hammer. "So you remember what supper costs?" He smiled and gave it back. "Your board. Your nail." Clara drove the final nail into the pine. Elias picked up the tools. She took the other half of the load. Together they crossed the yard toward the men repairing the west fence. If you enjoy Western stories, where trust is earned through hard choices, subscribe and leave a like.